in terms of what I do at RBG?
Your speciality, let's say.
Oh, looks like the broadcast is live.
Oh, here we are. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. My name's Dan Chaput, and I'm a staff scientist at Science North. My background is in plant studies, first in forestry, and then horticulture and botany. And my colleague is from the Royal Botanical Gardens, and her name is Nadia. Tell us about yourself, Nadia.
Hi, everybody. Dan, it is great to be here with you today. I am a botanist at the Royal Botanical Gardens. And, well, you mentioned botany. Does everybody know what a botanist does and what botany is?
Probably not. You should tell them.
Okay, well, we'll do that. A botanist studies plants, and there are lots of career options in botany, from studying the tiny parts of plant cells that make plants work to studying how plants interact with everything around them to make the whole living planet work.
Yeah, well, I can speak for Nadia and myself. It's an absolutely fascinating field. It's been a passion of mine for a long, long time now. I tend to focus more on woody plants, trees and shrubs than other things, but that's just where my interests are drawing me. But I've learned about them all from, like you say, from on the cellular level up to the giants and their roles in the ecosystems. So, okay, today we're supposed to talk about the fall and the leaf change and the adaptations and things of that nature. So if you have any questions, guys, send them to us, and we'll do our best to answer them. I'm going to talk a little bit about trees. We're in Sudbury, while Nadia's near Hamilton. And so most of our leaves from the deciduous trees are mostly fallen. So we're past our peak, okay? And this is affected mostly by day length, okay? So when the days get shorter, the plants respond and the chlorophyll breaks down inside the leaves, and then the plants manifest their true colors, as it were. I'm going to keep this on a pretty simple level. So the color of, let's say, a red maple leaf is red, but in the summertime, we see it as green because of the little chloroplasts in the chlorophyll. So that's why we're seeing them as green plants in the summer, but then when the chlorophyll disappears, the plants are, as I said, they're showing their true colors.
That is so cool.
Oh, it's absolutely cool. And then maybe, because we don't have any questions yet, maybe Nadia could talk about a few of the other adaptations that plants have, from the smallest little annuals and perennial plants all the way up to trees. How do they survive the winter?
How do they survive the winter? Well, the deciduous trees lose their leaves because they have to if they're going to survive the winter, right? They're thin leaves, and they have liquids in them that would freeze if they stayed on the tree throughout the entire winter. And the freezing would damage the leaves, and that would just hurt the whole tree. So what they do is they start to produce a thin layer of cells at the base of the stalk that attaches the leaf to the tree. And that thin layer of cells starts to close off these vessels in the leaf. And these vessels are what the tree uses to bring the sugars that are made in the leaf down into the tree, and the water that's absorbed in through the roots up into the leaf. So the leaf produces this thin layer of cells that closes that off, and that is what starts the leaf, what gets this leaf starting to break down its chlorophyll that Dan was talking about earlier. And when that happens, the plant also starts to suck in all the sugars that are in the leaf back into the plant. That's precious food. It doesn't want to waste that, right? But not all of the sugars get brought back into the plant before the leaf gets sealed off. And there's another pigment. Dan was talking about chlorophyll, but there's also something called anthocyanin. What was it, Dan?
Anthocyanin.
Anthocyanin. That's it. There we go. All right. Okay, so anthocyanins. You've eaten anthocyanins. Have you had a purple cabbage before? It's purple because of anthocyanins. And the red apples and red strawberries and red cherries, that's all anthocyanin, giving it that gorgeous red and purple color. And our maples that are so famous for their red fall coloring are partly that way because of the anthocyanin in the leaf. And the fun thing is, that one isn't necessarily there all summer long, along with the chlorophyll. Sometimes the leaves start making the anthocyanins when the weather gets cold and the nights get long and it's getting ready for winter. And the anthocyanins will the anthocyanins will be more abundant when there's more sugar in that leaf.
That's right. So we just got a question, Nadia, and people are asking, why is it that some trees don't lose their leaves? So I'll start if that's okay, and then mostly when we think about trees that don't lose leaves, we think evergreens. So now evergreen leaves are specialized so that they don't lose a lot of moisture. They have a very thin leaf that's not prone to losing moisture, and there's a waxy coating on top of it. So they don't have to drop their needles to survive the winter, although the larch do, but we're not going to get into it. There are also some plants that are what's called a broad-leafed evergreens. Okay, so these are little plants, usually up north here, definitely small plants with leaves that remain on the plant, but the leaves are very resistant to losing moisture, and they have a waxy coating on them too. So it's to prevent the loss of moisture that trees are losing their leaves, but some trees have adaptations, especially the evergreens, okay, so that they don't lose a lot of moisture in the wintertime. So they still, like, below 10 hours of or above 10 hours of darkness, okay, plants stop growing. But that's one of the types, or two of the types of plants that don't lose their leaves in the winter.
Yeah, and on top of having that waxy protective coating on them, they have an adaptation inside the leaf where the liquid parts of the leaf have a chemical in it that is something like an antifreeze.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They produce, it's not exactly the same compound, but you would think of animals such as frogs that can freeze pretty much solid because they're producing these antifreeze sugar compounds inside of them that prevents the cells from exploding, really. So that's one of the do the evergreens ever freeze? Yeah, they do freeze, okay? But they have those protections inside of them that prevents the cell walls from exploding. To keep it simple. Nadia, do you have anything to add?
No, you covered it, Dan.
Okay, good. There are a few other adaptations, and I'll maybe talk about a couple of them. Now we're talking trees, but we also have plants that are herbaceous. That is to say, they're not woody plants. And a lot of these plants will take the sugars and things that are produced in the summertime and store them in roots. Think of a carrot, an onion. Okay, think of rhizomes. There's rhizomes in like bulbs, like tulips and daffodils and things like that. Those are storage structures so that the plant can survive the winter and have some food left in the spring so that they can shoot up again. And then for annuals, maybe I'll let you address that, Nadia.
So annuals are plants where the entire plant dies when it gets cold outside. It doesn't survive through the winter, but what it does to keep its species going is it produces seeds. And it drops that in the ground. And some seeds actually need to go through an entire winter and freeze before they can germinate in the spring.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, they call that a dormancy period. And so the seeds are very resistant to freezing also from all the compounds that are in them. And that's why it's imperative for these plants to actually flower and produce seed because otherwise they wouldn't survive.
All right. So it looks like we have another question, Dan. And Benedict asked, You mentioned larch losing their leaves. Are there other conifers that lose their leaves?
For Northern Ontario, I can say that no. I'm not. I have a good knowledge of the boreal forest and the Great Lakes St. Lawrence forest. So here in Sudbury, we're sort of on the transition zone between boreal and Great Lakes St. Lawrence. Whereas down your way, Nadia, and in some more, let's say, temperate climates, there are certain other evergreens that lose their leaves, but nothing comes to mind right away.
All right. Well, I was walking on the trails and I saw a white pine where the leaves at the tips of the branches were deep, dark, beautiful green, but the leaves that were further back were starting to turn yellow, and it looked like they were getting ready to fall off.
Yeah, and there's the old leaves from evergreens do fall off, and they do produce new leaves. So that's why when you have a bunch of pines and spruces and such on your property, that you'll see this layer of leaves or needles, which are leaves, underneath. Not really good for the grass, but on the other side, you don't have to cut the grass underneath the tree anymore. Another question. Aaron Alt asks, some trees take a long time to change colors and lose their leaves, while others it seems to happen overnight. What causes this difference in duration, leaf color, and leaf drop? You want to address that?
Well, I will start, and then maybe you can take it from there. It's actually genetically wired into the species. When in the fall it starts to get ready for the winter, and it has a lot to do with the length of the night and how much daylight there is. So if you were to take a red maple that turns red in, say, here at the end of September, say in Hamilton, and plant that same red maple in Europe, where there are less trees that have red coloring, they have more of a yellow colored fall over there, it would turn red at the same time as it would here in Hamilton.
There's adaptations. There's also certain trees like we have a couple of species of oak up here where the leaves will persist on the trees for a very long time. So you'll see the leaves and they've turned. The oaks up here are usually more brownish, sometimes reddish for the red oaks, but their leaves will stay on the tree for a long time because it seems that the abscission layer, that coarse layer of cells that Nadia was talking about a while ago, takes a bit longer to form.
What is the big difference in the landscape right now when we compare Sudbury and Hamilton? How long does it take for Hamilton to catch up, if it ever does?
It depends what you mean by catch up. I mean, all the leaves of the deciduous trees that fall off will fall off in both places. I mean, as you head north, okay, the latitudes are changing a little bit. The day length changes a little bit. Sometimes a few minutes between Hamilton and Sudbury will greatly affect the leaf drop. So as Nadia mentioned a while ago, probably before we were on live, is that their leaf colors are still pretty prominent, while here in Sudbury, the birch pretty much leaves have fallen and the maple leaves have fallen. The poplars still have some leaves on them, and the cherry trees leaves have fallen, the pin and the choke cherries. So just a little bit of difference there is probably why we have a lot less leaves than you do, Nadia.
Yeah, whereas in Hamilton, most of the trees still have their leaves on them right now. And the maples are a beautiful red, and the oaks are a bronze, red, crimson-y, gorgeous color. Now, we also have different species, Dan.
We do, yes.
And in Hamilton.
Yeah. There are because of there's climate zones that are designated to say that we're in zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. Here in Sudbury, we're in zone 3, maybe zone 4 in the city. If we go to the outskirts where I am, I'm between zone 2 and 3, which is drastically different in temperature than what it would be where Nadia is, which is zone 6, maybe, or thereabouts.
Yeah, 6B. And if you're right up against the lake, then you're in zone 7A. So it's much warmer in Hamilton than it is up in Sudbury.
Yeah.
And there's also differences in the soil.
Oh, absolutely, yes. We are on the Canadian Shield, which means that we're more of an acid-based, the mineral soil, as opposed to the limestone type soils that are in the Hamilton area.
That's right. So there's a beautiful tree that I believe you have up in Sudbury, Dan. Do you have striped maple there?
We do. It's just on the margins. If you were to go from where I'm sitting right now, let's say if I was right in Sudbury, 30 kilometers north, we hit the boreal forest. And at that point, maples and oaks and ash, some ash even actually disappeared. They can't grow there. The climate is too harsh. While down, and we would like to have some trees like you have down there, like hickories and sycamores and things like that, but they will not grow up here just because it's that little temperature difference is just beyond what the trees are adapted for.
Right. At the same time, you have trees that we don't have here, like that striped maple. The striped maples don't really like the calcareous soils that we have here, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an absolutely beautiful tree. We have 5 species of maple in the Sudbury region. Only 2 of them of any given size, which would be the sugar and the red. Oh, and the silver. That's 3. But there's a big difference in what can be grown here as opposed to what can be grown in Southern Ontario. Okay, let's see. Oh, well, we're getting all kinds of questions now. So the next question is, are there any animals that can make use of leaves once they change colors or actually fall? Well, I'll give my 2 cents on this. I mean, some of them will use them as bedding if you're thinking of squirrels and things of that nature. But eventually those leaves do provide nutrients to the soil by being broken down by mostly invertebrates and on the microbial level. So it's nature, and really nothing is wasted.
Right. So the leaves that fall are very important for that soil fauna that needs it for food. Mm-hmm. And that soil fauna is very important for the rest of the environment, say the forest, to bring the nutrients into the forest that everything else that lives there is going to need. And if you happen to have some trees in your yard, don't put the leaves on the curb. Don't do all that work. Just leave them where they are. It's so good for the other plants and the other animals that are there. Because of that nutrient recycling that we were just talking about, and also because it makes great habitat for insects that overwinter. Mm-hmm. And having insects in your leaf litter is good food for things like birds and little mammals that need to pop out and have a little snack now and then.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to mention something else, that if you do have a lot of perennial flowers or other flowers in your garden, don't cut them down in the fall. I mean, a lot of these flowers, seed heads, provide food primarily for birds, like throughout the winter. So it's always best to leave stuff there. And then, yeah, just what I do with my leaves on my property is I just run them over with the mower to help the breakdown process a little faster. But I never pick anything up.
So it's better to be a bit of a lazy gardener.
Yeah, make it easy. Okay, I'll let you address the next one. This is from somebody I know. We're at Paulo.
Paulo asks, what is the main trigger of this process? Temperature or daylight length? What is the influence of those factors? Well, daylight length is always what gets the process started. Mm-hmm. And then temperatures will affect what the color palette is going to be.
Yeah, but it's primarily the daylight length, because that's the actual trigger to tell the plants that, okay, well, I can't really be growing anymore, or I don't have enough, there's not enough energy from the sun to actually have the chlorophyll produce the sugars that I need. So it's time to begin the process of changing color and abscission or losing the leaves. And then Jennifer says, I love striped maple, one of my favorites. I'm with you 100% on that. I have a cottage just north of the city, and there's a lot of striped maple on the property. And they're absolutely beautiful tree. The uniqueness, they call them a striped maple because they have these vertical stripes along the bark. Not a big tree, probably grows to about maybe 10 centimeters, 15 centimeters in diameter, but very attractive.
How do the leaves look on the striped maple in the fall?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's more of a yellow hue than anything else. Okay, so you mentioned anthocyanins a while ago. If you're looking on the yellow side of things, the yellow is carotenoids. Okay, so that's that particular compound, and it sounds like carrot because the carrots are full of them. So that's what the yellow and the orangish colors come from, where the anthocyanins come from. They're responsible for the red color. Okay, you want to do the next one?
Amanda Baker says, I saw some squirrels taking fallen leaves into their nest yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, that's, as I mentioned a while ago, that's, the leaves aren't just to provide organic matter. They do provide bedding for things like squirrels and chipmunks and so on. So they can use those as an insulator, really, okay, and as a padding, and when they're setting up their wintering areas.
Jen Dick asks, what happens to the forest floor plants in the winter?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to start?
Sure. Well, the annuals, the ones that will produce seeds and die, will decompose there. And the perennials, or the ones that store their resources in underground structures like roots or rhizomes, or if they're woody, then in their stems and their twigs, they will just drop their leaves and persist.
Yeah, and there's also an insulating factor as it relates to the snow on the ground. So I mean, you're looking at a different temperature at ground level than at where the top of the snow is. Not so much an issue in Hamilton, but when there's 2 meters of snow on the ground, the temperature is very different from the top to the bottom. Okay, David Galbraith. The palette of colors leaves assumes after the change seems to run from brown to yellow to orange to red, even scarlet. Are there any that go blue? I don't think so.
I have not seen any blue leaves. I was actually thinking when I was out walking and I was looking at all the colors and I thought I could almost collect leaves from the different kinds of trees here and put them onto a poster to make a rainbow, except I can't find blue.
Yeah, no blue or violet, right? There are quite a range of colors. I've even seen leaves that have had multiple colors on the same leaf, okay, where there would be a combination of orange and yellow. We even get some really nice pink pin cherry leaves up here in the fall. So they're quite lovely. But unfortunately, no blue. Okay, would be cool.
It would.
Yeah, maybe somebody will do that.
So I have another question, and it is, why is green the first pigment that degrades? Dan?
Yeah, okay. So while green is the color that's produced by the process of photosynthesis, we've all heard of chlorophyll and chloroplasts. The chloroplasts are sort of the producer of the green color. So they're the ones that start breaking down, okay, when the daylight is reducing. So then the green breaks down because of the drop in chlorophyll, okay, and then the colors of the plant start to manifest themselves that way.
Right. So, Dan, I've also read that the anthocyanin, that more purple color, starts to absorb some of the light when there's less chlorophyll, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it acts a little bit like a sunscreen because too much light can damage the leaf just like it can damage our skin.
Right. And then when it comes to brown, usually when you see a leaf that turns brown, it's what you're really seeing is cellular walls. Okay, it's not really being caused by any sort of chemical process. It's just the cellular walls inside the leaves are brown, and so you have a brown leaf. Oh, where do plants store their nutrients to regrow their leaves when the spring comes? Nadia?
Well, they will store nutrients in the roots, but this is a good time also to talk about buds. So one of the ways that you can identify a tree in the winter, and you can always identify a tree all year round, even when the leaves are not on it. And one of the things that really helps a lot with that are the buds on the twigs. And a really cool story about trees is what is inside a bud. That bud contains the future of that tree. Everything that it needs to grow a branch and the leaf the next spring and into the summer is already in that bud. It's just in tiny form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned when I had gone to school like 100 years ago or so, we had to identify over 300 species in the winter times by bud alone.
Wow.
And you remember these things, so yeah, there's some buds are very characteristic to the plant that produces them. So like willows will produce buds like any other plant, but every willow species has a different bud than the other. So you can positively identify any plant that way. Okay, so yeah. No questions right now, so we can talk about something else, I guess.
Well, I could show you something. We were talking about some of the things that botanists do earlier. And one of the things that I do is I take care of a herbarium. And not a lot of people know what a herbarium is, so I'll define that for you. We've all been to a library, and libraries are places where there are a lot of books, and we can go there and we can borrow them and read them. And a herbarium is a little bit like that, only instead of having lots of books, we have a lot of plants, and they have been pressed flat and dried, and then glued onto a high-quality paper, and this is meant to last for centuries. So when you have the plant glued onto the paper, we call that a herbarium specimen. And this is a plant press. This way. This is what we use to flatten and dry out the plants. And just this weekend, when I went out for a hike, I collected a few leaves and I put them in this plant press. So I'm going to open it up here and we'll see how these leaves have dried. But we have another question here. We have two.
Okay, where would I find more species, Hamilton or Sudbury? Hamilton.
Yeah, for sure.
It's simply because it's a warmer climate that allows for more plants to thrive in that climate. The closer you go to the equator, the greater the biodiversity becomes. So if you're thinking about plants in the jungle that have the same daylight and the same temperatures year round, the biodiversity is massive.
Right. And Dan, you were saying that you are just on the edge of the boreal forest zone.
That's right.
Down here in Hamilton, we're in the Carolinian zone. And it is sandwiched between the mixed deciduous forest zone, and we're pretty close. Well, close. We're nowhere near as close to the boreal as you are, but we have some species that come from there. And we are very close to the more southern forests of the USA. So we have a lot of species here that are on the edge. Just like earlier, we were talking about how you're on the edge of the zone where striped maples will grow.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one I just pulled out of the plant press. And I'll try to somehow put it against a background that you can see. And it looks like this. This one is called Sassafras. And I think this is one of the coolest trees we have because it has 3 kinds of leaves. It has some leaves that are just simple like this. It just looks like, you know, a normal leaf that you would draw if you were just drawing a leaf. And then it has other leaves that look like dinosaur paws. Yeah, and this first leaf, it was kind of a golden yellow, and this one's got purple in it, so lots of anthocyanins in this one. And I dropped one. Whoops. Oh, I dropped the other leaf. But it also has leaves that look like mittens. So instead of having 3 lobes like this, it has 2, and it looks like a pair of mittens.
That definitely doesn't grow in Sudbury.
It definitely does not grow in Sudbury.
Okay, I'll let you address Paulo's question again.
Yes. Could you explain again the sunscreen thing? Why do trees need that? Okay, so let's go back to photosynthesis. And in photosynthesis, plants will use that pigment called chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll will absorb photons that just come in from the light. And it uses that energy from the photons to create the sugars, right? It'll use water and carbon dioxide, and with the energy from the photons, it will produce oxygen and sugars. So once the chlorophyll starts to break down, there isn't so much there to absorb those photons anymore, and the tree needs to protect itself from potential damage from those photons bouncing around in the leaf. And the anthocyanins do a great job at absorbing those photons.
There you go. Okay, next we have Christine Carroll. I love tamarack trees. Can you tell us about them? Here in Northern Ontario, in the Sudbury region, we have a species of tamarack, and it is usually found in wet areas. Okay, so usually in lower areas, they grow on the margins of swamps and things like that. But I have transplanted trees, with permission, of course, okay, from Ontario Hydro, from where they were going to cut them down anyways, into my yard, which is very dry and very sandy, and the tamaracks have thrived anyways. So they're a very, very adaptable tree. They can grow and right up to zone 1. They're a very tough tree. And with the trees I'm growing here, I was getting, when they were younger, about 1 meter a year, which is incredible. For an evergreen especially. So yeah, I highly recommend them. I'm looking at some right now out my window, and they're beautiful yellow. There are other species that grow here, such as the Japanese larch and a couple of other ones, but the native one is a beautiful tree, and I would recommend it. Okay, David's question. Oh, that's for you. Definitely.
Do you collect specimens for the herbarium after they change color or just before? Both. So one of the things that I do as a botanist is I go out and I record the plant species that are growing here at Royal Botanical Gardens. And I do that partly to keep track of the changes that are there. The changes in the vegetation, and knowing how the vegetation changes helps us understand how healthy an ecosystem is and helps us know how to conserve it, which is a very important thing to do down here in the city because there are so many different pressures on our natural areas from the urban environment. So it might be a little bit different from how it is for you up in Sudbury, Dan. But as we're out doing these vegetation surveys, it can be any time of year. I can be out in the winter or in the spring, in the summer, and the fall, all seasons. And we will collect specimens of the plants that we see at whatever time it is. So we might just have beautiful specimens of trees that are in their winter form, and we know them by what the twigs look like and what the buds look like on there. Or in the middle of summer when it's green and maybe it even has flowers, or it might be autumn where we have stunning colors on them.
Good. And then we got a comment from Melanie Demers. I'm teaching online from Toronto, and thank you so much for this presentation. You're very welcome. My grade 7 students are wondering if squirrels would eat leaves if they depleted other food sources. I have never seen a squirrel deplete their food resources, especially up here. I mean, we have tons of acorns, we have tons of pine cones. I know that squirrels are not necessarily just herbivores. They will consume insects and even birds and things like that. So I'm not sure about the leaf thing. I'm afraid I can't answer that one.
Yeah, I don't have the answer either. And it doesn't help that I live in the city, and that means that the squirrels always have a food source. I have found them burying muffins and granola bars in my garden.
Yeah, we're just getting the what the people call here the black squirrels or the gray squirrels are just appearing in the Sudbury area within the last couple of years. And before that, all we had was the red and the chipmunks. So next, where are we here? Oh yeah, Amanda Baker. What are the tools a dendrologist would carry with them into the forest? Primarily a tree core. Okay, so they would take a little. Instead of cutting the tree down and actually examining the growth pattern and killing the tree, you can actually take a core sample, where you would drill into the tree, and then you pull out a little cylinder, maybe the size of a pencil, and that way you could analyze the tree growth, the growth pattern of that particular tree. Or a chainsaw, but then you're killing the tree. Anything else, Nadia?
Well, I was thinking maybe binoculars. Because sometimes you want to be able to see what the trees are that are far away, and you can't walk to them. Here we're on the Niagara Escarpment, and there's a very big cliff stopping us from getting from one tree to another sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, not the situation up here. There's a lot of lakes and rivers in the way, but you can walk just about anywhere. Do you want the next one, Nadia?
Katrina asks, why the maple trees' leaves have all those black spots? Now, the maple trees with the leaves with all the black spots have leaves that look a lot like sugar maple leaves, but they're actually Norway maples. And I use those black spots to help me know sometimes whether it's a sugar maple or whether it's a Norway maple, but I'm not entirely sure what causes those black spots. Dan, do you know?
Well, we don't have a lot of Norway maple up here. Another good way to tell them apart is that if you break the leaf off, you get a milky latex from the Norway maple, while you don't get it from the sugar maple. We get these different spots. It could be black or green or red even, and they're caused sometimes by insects or fungus or even bacteria. And sometimes an insect, like a tiny little wasp, will lay an egg on the leaf, and they develop these little galls. It's called a little gall, where the little larva of the wasp will actually develop inside of that. Okay, so that's a protective coating for that particular insect. These can develop on stems and leaves and trunks even. And they're not always caused by insects, but they often are. I've noticed that for the most part, they don't really harm the tree. I mean, the tree will keep growing and producing. I've never seen them in such numbers that the tree would actually, the photosynthesis would be affected enough to damage the tree. Okay, so it looks like we're going to be wrapping up. Thank you from me here at Science North. And some wonderful questions, and I had a lot of fun doing this.
Yeah, so did I. Thank you, Dan, and thank you everybody who tuned in and sent us questions.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, we'll do it again someday.
Yes.
Okay, bye everyone.
Enjoy the autumn, everybody.